The first thing I heard wasn't birds, it was engines. Loud, grinding, arrogant engines. I ran outside in my work boots, coffee still in hand, and froze. Across my south pasture where my cows used to graze, a line of bright orange construction trucks roared like invaders. Fresh asphalt gleamed under the rising sun, cutting through my family's land like a blade. Steam hissed. Workers shouted. And right in the middle of it all stood a woman in a pink blazer, holding a clipboard like a sword. Karen, HOA president, smiling like she'd just conquered Rome. My land, my fence, my heritage. They didn't even ask. I yelled so loud the birds stopped singing. The workers paused. Karen didn't even flinch, she just waved at me like I was the help. That's when something in me snapped. You can steal my peace, you can build your pretty roads, but not on my soil. Not today. Because this farm's about to become the battlefield the HOA never saw coming. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from and hit subscribe, because this war, it's about to get real. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same thing, those glossy black tire tracks slashing through my pasture like someone had signed their name across my family's history. By morning, the smell of asphalt still hung thick in the air. My cows stood at the fence line, confused, their hooves pressing against what used to be soft dirt. I wanted to tear the road up myself right then and there, but I'd learned long ago that sometimes the worst revenge is patience. Instead, I put on my cleanest flannel, tucked my shirt, and drove straight into the heart of suburbia to the beige fortress they called the HOA office. The building sat at the edge of what used to be my cornfield. Now it was a parade of manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and people who waved too hard at each other while secretly counting each other's trash bins. The sign out front read, Oakwood Meadows Homeowners Association, where community comes first. Yeah, right after hypocrisy. I pushed through the glass doors, and the smell hit me, printer, toner, perfume, and a faint trace of fake authority. Behind the front counter sat her, Karen, blonde hair sculpted like a helmet, a smile that could cut glass, and in her hands the one thing that made her feel immortal, her clipboard. Charlie, she sang my name like we were old friends sharing lemonade on a porch. What a surprise. What can I do for you today? I kept my voice steady. You can start by explaining why there's a brand new 2-lane road slicing through my pasture. Her smile twitched just slightly. Oh, that. Isn't it lovely? It's part of our new community beautification initiative. Beautification, I said, fighting the urge to laugh. Karen, it's a road. Through my land. Yes, she nodded proudly, flipping a page on her clipboard like it was scripture. It provides easier access for residents to reach the new subdivision. It's for the greater good. The greater good, I repeated, my tone low. Karen, that road runs through my south pasture. My cows don't need easier access to the cul-de-sac. She gave a tight little chuckle, the kind of laugh people use when they think they're smarter than you. The board voted on it unanimously. I didn't vote on it, I said. Well, of course not. You're technically outside the HOA jurisdiction. Then why I stepped closer. Did you build a road inside my fence line? She sighed the way a kindergarten teacher might when explaining crayons aren't food. Oh, Charlie, it's not private property anymore. The HOA annexed that section of your land last month. That word annexed snapped something in me. Annexed, I said, my voice calm but dangerous. Karen, you can't annex land you don't own. Her fingers drummed against the clipboard as if the laminated bylaws were her shield. It's all in the documentation, she said sweetly. You should have read the letter we sent. Oh, I read your letters, I said. Every single one about lawn heights and fence colors. But I must have missed the one where you announced you were seizing private farmland. Karen's eyes flickered just for a second, but she recovered fast. We prefer the term reallocation. I stared at her. You paved over 3 generations of soil, Karen. My grandfather planted that field. My father worked it till the day he died. And you, I pointed toward her clipboard, turned it into a shortcut for SUVs. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile anymore. Change can be uncomfortable, Charlie, but it's for the community's benefit. You don't want to be the bad neighbor, do you? I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. No, Karen, I said softly, but I do have a history of being a very persistent one. Her eyes narrowed, but I'd already turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I could hear her whisper to someone in the back office, smug as ever, "He'll come around. They always do." Outside, the sun was sharp, bouncing off every chrome bumper and fake smile in Oakwood Meadows. I stood beside my truck, breathing hard, watching kids ride bikes across the same asphalt that cut through my pasture. They always do. Not this time. That night, I drove the fence line in silence. The moonlight traced the road's edge, a glistening scar of tar. I could still see where the bulldozers had ripped down my fence posts, where my grass had been flattened under their tires. I parked near the split oak at the border, the same tree my father used to tie his horse to, back when this was real country, and just stood there staring. That road wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a message. They weren't trying to make the community beautiful, they were trying to erase me from it. And they thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd let it slide. I took out my old notebook from the truck's glove box, flipped open to a blank page, and started writing Step 1, lawyer. Step 2, land deeds. Step 3, every damn receipt. Step 4, burn them down with paperwork. I smiled to myself. My father used to say, "You can't fight a fool with fists, you fight them with proof." And tomorrow I'd find my proof. When I finally went back inside the farmhouse, the road was still visible through the window, lit faintly by the moon. It looked quiet now, still harmless. But I knew better. That road wasn't finished. It was just waiting for headlights. The next morning would be the first move in a war that HOA had no idea it had started. By sunrise, I was already halfway to town, coffee thermos on the passenger seat and fury in the rearview mirror. I wasn't the kind of man who ran to lawyers. I believed in fixing fences with wire and sweat, not paperwork. But this wasn't a broken fence, it was a full-blown invasion. The HOA wanted a war of bylaws and bureaucracy. Fine, I'd bring the law. Tom Jenkins had been my friend for 30 years. We'd fought wildfires together back when he still wore a badge before he swapped a fire hose for legal briefs. His office sat above a diner that smelled like bacon and justice, a good sign if you asked me. When I walked in, Tom was hunched over his desk, tie-loose eyes half closed behind a mountain of folders. He looked up and smirked. Well, Charlie Turner, the last honest farmer in a 10-mile radius. What trouble did you plow into this time? Trouble didn't wait for me, I said, dropping a thick envelope of photos on his desk. It paved a road right through my pasture. He frowned, flipping through the prints. Asphalt. Painted lines. A stop sign rooted in my soil. You're kidding. I wish I was. Who built it? The HOA. Tom blinked, then laughed. You're serious, Karen. Serious. His laughter died instantly. Everyone in the county knew Karen Whitmore, Queen of Oakwood Meadows, the woman who could fine you for breathing too loud near a flower bed. Tom whistled low. All right, tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the road, the annex claim, the fake smiles, the clipboard. Halfway through, he raised a hand. Annexed. She actually said that, like she was planting a flag on the moon. Jesus, Charlie. The HOA can't annex land they don't own. That's what I said. He leaned back, chair creaking. Okay. First step, I'll need copies of your property deed boundary survey and any letters they've sent you in the past year. Don't touch the road. Don't block it. Not yet. Why not? I grunted. You planning to wait for them to build a toll booth? Tom smiled. Because the moment you move that barricade, they'll scream obstruction of community access. We keep it clean. We play by the book while they choke on the pages. I had to admit I liked that plan. We spent the next 2 hours combing through the paperwork. My land deeds dated back to my grandfather in 1948. Every inch of that south pasture was marked, measured, and paid for. The HOA's jurisdiction stopped 300 yards short of my fence line. Tom highlighted every detail with his pen like he was drawing battle plans. Here's what we'll do, he said finally. I'll draft a cease and desist notice, demanding they halt use of the road until ownership is verified. I'll also file an injunction with the county clerk. In the meantime, you gather everything else, photos, timestamps, eyewitnesses. We'll build a file thicker than Karen's ego. I smirked. That's going to take a lot of paper, Tom chuckled. Good thing I buy toner by the gallon. When I left his office, the diner downstairs was filling with regulars, construction guys, farmers, truckers, folks who still believed a handshake meant something. I told the waitress to keep Tom's coffee topped off. He was about to make HOA history. Driving home, I passed the shiny new subdivision that started this whole mess. Cookie-cutter houses stood shoulder to shoulder, all painted the same acceptable shade of beige. Every mailbox identical, every lawn trimmed to regulation perfection. I couldn't help thinking. They built this world to control every inch of it. But my land wasn't beige. It was stubborn brown earth, cracked with history and sweat, the kind that didn't bow to clipboards. When I reached the farm, the road shimmered in the heat like a black snake sleeping across my field. I parked near the fence, grabbed my camera, and started documenting everything. The angle of the road, the broken fence posts, the survey marker they'd ignored, every tire track, every sign, every insult. If the law was a battlefield, I intended to arm myself to the teeth. By evening, my kitchen table was covered with photos, receipts, property maps, and 3 half-empty coffee mugs. I labeled each stack carefully. Evidence A, construction damage. Evidence B, boundary violation. Evidence C, Karen's nonsense. Somewhere around midnight, I found an old shoebox tucked in a cabinet, my father's papers. Inside were yellowed survey maps and letters from the county zoning board, proving our property lines hadn't changed since before HOA even existed. I stared at those documents for a long time. It felt like my dad was helping me fight back from the grave. The next morning, I delivered copies to Tom. He flipped through them and grinned. Perfect. This is exactly what we need. You think we can win? I asked. Oh, we're not just going to win, he said. We're going to bury them in their own paperwork. I liked the sound of that. Still, something gnawed at me. Paper alone wasn't enough. The HOA had money, lawyers, and arrogance on their side. I had truth and a tractor. That night, I sat on the porch watching headlights glide across the illegal road. A silver SUV slowed down as it passed. The driver, some man from the new subdivision, gave me a disapproving look like I was the problem. I raised my coffee mug in salute. Enjoy the shortcut, buddy. Won't last long. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. No word from Karen, no official notice. Just that smug silence people use when they think they've already won. But I wasn't waiting. I started visiting the county records office myself, digging into public documents. I learned the HOA had submitted a community access improvement request 6 months earlier. The permit covered their own streets, not private farmland. Yet somehow the invoices listed South Pasture Extension completed. In other words, they'd falsified construction paperwork. Bingo. I photocopied everything, highlighted the discrepancies, and added it to the growing binder on my kitchen table. The thing was heavy enough to use as a weapon now. When Tom saw it, he whistled. You're turning into quite the paralegal, Charlie. I just call it self-defense. He laughed, then grew serious. Next step, we file a formal complaint with the county property board. Let's see how they enjoy a little daylight on their shady operation. That was the first night I slept well in a week. Because for the first time since that road appeared, I wasn't angry, I was focused. Karen thought she'd steamroll me. She didn't realize she'd just built the perfect evidence trail right through my land. As I locked the farmhouse door, I looked out over the field. The moonlight turned the road silver. It looked calm, almost peaceful, but I knew the storm was coming. I whispered to the night, "You wanted a beautification project, Karen. Let's make this county real pretty with your name on every lawsuit I file." Tomorrow I'd start digging deeper, not with a shovel but with paper cuts. The funny thing about small towns is that the gossip always moves faster than the mail. By the time I finished breakfast that Friday, everyone from the feed store to the sheriff's office had already heard the same headline, "Farmer threatens HOA over illegal road." I didn't mind. I'd rather they call me crazy than call me quiet. That morning I drove into town again, this time not for legal help. I was on a mission to dig up every scrap of dirt the HOA had buried under their shiny bylaws. The county records office was a squat brick building with a fading flag out front, and a woman named Betty guarding the archives like a dragon sitting on gold. She'd been there since the 82nds and knew more secrets about land boundaries than anyone alive. "Morning, Charlie," she said without looking up from her crossword. "What brings you here? Another zoning fight. Worse," I said. The HOA paved a road through my pasture. Her pencil froze midair. "They what you heard me." "Well, that's bold even for Karen." I smiled grimly. "You've heard of her too." Betty laughed. "Sweetheart, everyone's heard of Karen." She called once to complain the courthouse lawn was uneven. I leaned on the counter. "I need the original subdivision maps, the HOA incorporation papers, and any permits related to road construction in Oakwood Meadows." She squinted at me curious. "You building a case or burning a bridge? Maybe both," she grinned. "Give me 15 minutes. Betty returned with a dusty box labeled Oakwood HOA, 2009, present. Inside were rolled blueprints, stamped letters, and meeting transcripts printed on fading paper. As I flipped through them, a pattern started to form: misused funds, vague community projects, and suspicious budget increases. Then I found a line item titled South Access Improvement, dated 3 months before the road appeared on my property. The signature line read, "Approved by Karen Whitmore." But here's the kicker. There was no county permit number attached. No authorization, no inspection report, no approval signature from the Department of Transportation, just a fake number scribbled in pen. I leaned back, heart pounding. They built it off the books. Betty glanced over my shoulder. That's not just illegal, Charlie. That's fraud. Good, I said. That's my favorite kind of crime to prove. Back home, I turned my kitchen table into a crime lab. Folders spread across every inch. Photos, copies, receipts. I even started color-coding the documents: red for fraud, yellow for property violations, blue for stupidity. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. I read every HOA newsletter, every community update, every piece of propaganda they'd mailed. I highlighted phrases like budget allocation pending and expedited improvement plan. Each one was a breadcrumb leading to something rotten. What really made me laugh was how careful they thought they were. Karen had signed almost everything with her little flourish K. Whitmore president. She might as well have left fingerprints on the asphalt. But the paper trail wasn't enough. I needed witnesses. I started with my neighbors, the ones still brave enough to answer when the HOA came knocking. First stopped the Pattersons, a retired couple who'd lived at the edge of the development since before it was even called Oakwood Meadows. Karen fined us $200, Mrs. Patterson told me, hands trembling as she poured sweet tea, for planting tulips instead of marigolds. Said they weren't aesthetically aligned with community values. Her husband snorted. I told her our values were photosynthesis. Didn't help. I took notes, thanked them, and moved on. Next was the Rodriguez family, who'd had their mailbox upgraded without consent and were billed $400 for the service. She said the HOA was standardizing the neighborhood, Mr. Rodriguez said, shaking his head. I told her this isn't a car factory. Each conversation painted the same picture: a power-hungry HOA running the neighborhood like a dictatorship in khaki shorts. By the end of the week, I had 6 written statements, 12 photos, and a digital drive full of scanned documents. My evidence binder was now so thick I had to reinforce it with duct tape. Tom called me that Sunday evening. "Charlie, I read through what you sent. You've got them cornered." "Good," I said. "I'm just getting started." But there was one thing that didn't sit right. In all the documents, one name kept showing up under approved expenses, a contractor called M&J Infrastructure Solutions. I'd never heard of them, and when I called the number listed on the invoices, it went straight to voicemail, a generic one. No company greeting, no address. So, I drove to the location printed on their letterhead, an empty lot beside a hardware store. Just dirt and weeds. The company didn't exist. That's when it hit me. Karen had fabricated a construction company to launder HOA funds and build the road illegally. I took photos, GPS coordinates, everything. This was no longer about a stolen pasture. This was a full-blown corruption case. The following Monday, I stopped by the local cafe, the one where all the early risers gathered to gossip before work. The place went quiet when I walked in. Someone muttered, "That's the guy with the road." I just nodded and ordered coffee. Mrs. Whitaker, the widow from down the road, leaned over from her booth. "You give that woman hell, Charlie. She fined me $50 once because my Christmas lights were up before Thanksgiving." I chuckled. "Then consider this payback with interest." She grinned. "If you need a witness, I bake excellent brownies and tell the truth loudly." Duly noted. As I drove home, I realized something important. I wasn't fighting this war alone anymore. Every neighbor I talked to had a story. Every story added weight to my cause. Karen had ruled by fear, but fear was a fragile throne once people stopped bowing. That evening, I organized everything into a single monstrous binder, labeled HOA Corruption, Exhibit A. Inside, copies of fraudulent invoices from the fake contractor, photos of the unauthorized road, letters proving HOA funds were diverted, statements from residents documenting abuse of power, and a list of every violation I could find, right down to the missing permit number. I stared at that binder like it was a loaded weapon. Then I called Tom. "We're ready." He didn't hesitate. "Tomorrow we file." I hung up and walked outside. The sun was setting over the pasture, the illegal road glowing orange under the light. I could almost hear the echo of engines that had torn through my fence a week ago. But this time there was no anger, only focus. They wanted to pave over me, erase me, pretend my land didn't matter. But I just turned their shortcut into a trap. I smiled to myself, whispering, "You paved the wrong road, Karen. Let's see you drive out of this one." I went back inside, flipped off the lights, and left the binder sitting in the center of the table, under the glow of a single lamp. It looked like a confession waiting to be read. Tomorrow, the HOA would learn something new about farmers. We know how to dig, and sometimes we dig deep enough to bury you. The road sat there for days like a scar that refused to heal. I watched SUVs roll over it, watched joggers in pastel gear wave like nothing had happened. They treated that strip of asphalt as if it had been born with the land, not stolen from it. Tom told me to wait for the county's response. He said patience would make us look like the victims. But I'd been patient for a week, and every car that crossed my pasture felt like another boot on my neck. So, on a blazing Saturday morning, I decided patience had done enough. I climbed into my old John Deere 6400, the same tractor my father bought back when gas was cheap and men were tougher. I topped off the diesel, pulled my hat low, and rumbled toward the south pasture. The cows trotted alongside me like curious spectators. By 9 a.m., the sun was high, burning across the hood. The road shimmered like a black mirror. I parked the tractor dead center, turned off the engine, and climbed down. Then I got to work. First, I dragged 2 massive hay bales from the barn and set them across each lane like makeshift barricades. Then I pounded a wooden post into the soil beside the tractor and hung a freshly painted sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." The final touch, a bright red flag tied to the exhaust pipe. Subtle no. But neither was having your land stolen. When I was done, I leaned against a hay bale, wiped the sweat from my face, and looked around. The field was quiet except for the hum of cicadas and the faint lowing of cattle. It felt right, like balance had returned. Of course, balance never lasts long when Karen's involved. At 1015 sharp, I heard the familiar growl of a Lexus SUV coming down the hill. It stopped a few yards from my barricade. Out stepped Karen, pink blazer sunglasses, and that same indestructible clipboard clutched to her chest. Behind her, 3 other board members trickled out of their cars, each one armed with matching clipboards and the confidence of people who'd never been told no in their lives. Karen's heels clicked on the asphalt like war drums. "Charlie," she said sweetly, "what's the meaning of this?" I took a slow sip from my thermos. "It's a blockade." I can see that she snapped. "You're obstructing a community road." I raised an eyebrow. "A community road built illegally on private property. My property." She gave a patronizing smile. "Charlie, this road serves over 100 residents. You can't just block access because you feel territorial." "Territorial," I said, stepping forward. "That's a polite way to describe ownership, don't you think?" Karen's entourage exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a man in a golf visor, muttered, "This is against the bylaws." I turned toward him. Funny thing about bylaws, they stop mattering at the edge of HOA territory. And that edge ends 300 yards north. Karen's smile thinned. "This is going to reflect poorly on you when the board reviews your compliance record." I laughed. "You mean the same board that paved a road without permission? Please, Karen, write me up. Maybe use that clipboard to list your crimes while you're at it." Her jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, Charlie. The community will not stand for this kind of obstruction." "Oh, I think they will," I said, nodding toward the fence line. She turned and froze. Half a dozen neighbors stood there, phones out filming. The Pattersons, the Rodriguezes, even Mrs. Whitaker holding a brownie tray like she was tailgating a revolution. Someone yelled, "Tell her whose land it is." Charlie Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. "Put those phones away, this is private." "Private," I interrupted. "Now you care about private," the crowd laughed. Even the cows mooed like they were in on the joke. Karen spun around clipboard, trembling. "I'll have the sheriff out here within the hour." "Good," I said calmly. "He eats my wife's pie every Thanksgiving. Maybe he'll stay for dessert." For the first time since I'd known her, Karen didn't have a comeback. She turned on her heel, muttering something about non-compliance reports as her little army followed behind. As their cars disappeared, the neighbors cheered. Mrs. Whitaker walked over, handing me a brownie. "You looked like you needed sugar more than gasoline." I laughed and took a bite. You know, this might be the first roadblock in history fueled by baked goods. By afternoon, the story was already all over the local Facebook groups. Farmer Block's HOA road videos of Karen's meltdown hit 1,000 views before sunset. Someone even made a meme of her face with the caption, "Paved the wrong pasture." The HOA tried to fight back with their own narrative, calling me a disruptive influence and a threat to community harmony. But it was too late. People had seen the footage. The comments were brutal. Team Charlie all the way. Finally, someone stands up to those clipboard tyrants. Imagine building a road on someone's land and calling him the problem. Even the local paper ran a headline, "David meets Goliath. Farmer defies HOA takeover." I spent the next 2 days manning the blockade. Every time a car pulled up, I'd wave politely and point to the sign. Most drivers turned around. A few shouted insults. One guy asked if I was starting a protest. "No," I said, grinning, "just a property restoration project." By Monday, the HOA had clearly decided to escalate. I woke up to find two uniformed men standing at the barricade, not police, but private security hired by Karen herself. Their shirts said Oakwood Community Safety Division, which was ironic since they were standing on land the community didn't own. One of them stepped forward. "Sir, you're in violation of the HOA's access policy. You'll need to move this tractor." I crossed my arms. "You're trespassing." The man hesitated, looking uncertain. "Ma'am said." "Ma'am doesn't own this dirt," I said. "County records prove it." The second guard whispered something to his partner, and they both backed off. "We'll report this to the board." "Do that," I said. "And tell the board I said hi." They left tires squealing like kids caught shoplifting. That evening, Tom called. His voice carried the same mix of amusement and caution. "Charlie, you're trending again." "I'm aware," I said. "Karen tried to send mall cops after me." "She's panicking," he said. "Which means we're close. But listen, be careful. If she files a complaint for obstruction, it'll lead straight to court." "That's the plan, Tom." "Let her," he chuckled. "You really want this to go to trial?" "Absolutely. I've got the evidence, the witnesses, and now the public." "Let her dig her own hole." He paused, then said, "All right, just don't say anything to the press you'll regret." I smirked. "The only thing I regret is letting her touch my pasture." That night, the sky turned blood orange. I sat on the tractor watching the last sunlight fade behind the ridge. The cows grazed near the fence, and the hay bales glowed like golden walls. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not because the fight was over, but because I finally had the upper hand. Karen thought she could pave over me, drown me in bylaws, bury me under paperwork. But what she didn't understand is this: farmers know how to work with dirt. We know how to dig, how to plant, and how to wait for the right harvest. And her reckoning, it was just starting to grow roots. The morning after the blockade, I woke up to find 3 news vans parked at the end of my driveway. Reporters in crisp shirts were unloading tripods, adjusting microphones, and brushing dust off their shoes like they were entering a war zone. I wasn't surprised. The videos had already gone viral overnight, me leaning against the tractor, Karen yelling about bylaws, and a crowd of neighbors cheering like it was a county fair. Someone even set it to dramatic violin music and titled it "The Battle of Oakwood Meadows." When I stepped outside, a young reporter waved eagerly. "Mr. Turner, can we get a comment?" I took my time walking over coffee and hand hat tilted low. "You can," I said, "but make sure you spell my name right. And make sure you spell trespassing right, too." She laughed nervously. "Can you tell our viewers what started this conflict?" I pointed toward the asphalt ribbon cutting across my field. "That. HOA, arrogance, and a bulldozer." Within hours, my story spread beyond town. Local radio ran a segment titled, "Farmer Stands Up to HOA Overreach." Even the state paper picked it up, quoting me as saying, "They paved the wrong man's land." Karen must have been losing her mind. By noon, neighbors started showing up again. First the Pattersons with sandwiches, then the Rodriguezes with cold lemonade, and finally Mrs. Whitaker with another tray of brownies. "You've started a movement," she said proudly, handing me a plate. "I didn't start anything," I replied. "They just finally picked a fight everyone could see." She laughed. "Don't be modest. You gave this whole neighborhood something it hasn't had in years, hope that someone can actually tell Karen no." It was true. For years, people had swallowed fines, threats, and letters written in 12-point Times New Roman arrogance. Now, seeing one old farmer stand his ground gave them permission to do the same. By mid-afternoon, my driveway looked like a small festival. Kids ran around waving homemade signs, "Team Charlie" and "Keep Your Roads, Give Back Our Cows." Someone even brought a portable speaker blasting Johnny Cash's "God's Gonna Cut You Down." I couldn't help but grin. Of course, not everyone was celebrating. Down the road, a few HOA loyalists stood scowling behind their manicured hedges, muttering about troublemakers. One man shouted, "You're embarrassing the community," I waved. "If you're embarrassed, you're welcome to leave it," the crowd laughed. But as funny as it all was, I knew the HOA wasn't done. They wouldn't back down quietly, they never did. That evening, I received the first official blowback, a letter taped to my gate stamped with the HOA seal. Notice of violation. You are hereby in breach of Section 8.3 of the Community Bylaws, obstructing a designated access road and impeding community operations. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in legal action. I read it twice, then laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. It wasn't just arrogance, it was desperation. I called Tom. "They're threatening to sue me." "Perfect," he said. "That's exactly what we want. Now we control the battlefield. Think they'll go through with it?" "Oh, absolutely," Tom chuckled. "Karen's too proud to back down. She's going to walk straight into her own trap." 2 days later, Karen proved him right. She held a press conference in front of the HOA office, complete with a banner reading "Preserving Community Standards." She stood at a podium, sunglasses gleaming, pretending she was running for mayor of insanity. "Mr. Turner's actions," she said into the camera, "are a direct violation of the HOA's mission to maintain order, beauty, and accessibility within Oakwood Meadows. His obstruction has endangered our residents and disrupted community harmony." The clip hit social media within hours and backfired spectacularly. The comments section was merciless. "Endangered residents, it's a tractor, not a landmine." "Community harmony, lady, you built a road on his farm," Karen really said, "order and beauty while standing on stolen land." By evening, the HOA's page was flooded with public backlash. Residents started demanding to see the financial records for the beautification projects. Others questioned where their monthly fees were going. The board cracked like an egg. 3 members resigned within a week, citing ethical concerns. One even emailed me privately to apologize, saying they'd voted under pressure. Karen, of course, refused to budge. She doubled down, insisting the road was lawful, necessary, and approved under the HOA Annexation Authority, which, as Tom pointed out, didn't actually exist. While the HOA was busy self-destructing, I kept documenting everything. Every attempt they made to remove the barricade, every time Karen drove past filming from her car, every snide letter slipped into my mailbox. It was a treasure trove of stupidity, and I intended to use all of it. One night, I was sitting on my porch when headlights swept across the pasture. A car slowed near the barricade, paused, and then crept forward. I turned on my flashlight. There she was, Karen in her Lexus, trying to take pictures of the tractor from across the road. I walked up, calm as you please. "Evening, Karen." Couldn't sleep. She jumped, fumbling her phone. I'm documenting violations." "Violations," I said, grinning. "You're on my property." She looked down at the asphalt under her tires. Her face paled. "Drive safe," I said, stepping back. "Wouldn't want you to scratch your car on illegal pavement." She sped off without another word. By the next morning, the county had officially received our complaint. Tom filed everything. The fake contractor records the missing permit, the fraudulent invoices. The clerk who accepted the binder reportedly said, "You could build a house with how thick this is." I liked that image. Meanwhile, the local news kept running follow-ups. The anchor called it a standoff between tradition and tyranny. That one made me laugh out loud. But the real victory came from the people. Neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact with the HOA started knocking on my door. One offered to testify. Another offered drone footage of the construction. Even the mailman admitted he'd seen HOA trucks crossing my fence line. Every story was another nail in Karen's coffin. A week later, I got a text from Tom. They filed the lawsuit. Showtime. I set my coffee down and looked out across the pasture. The blockade was still standing strong, tractor gleaming sign flapping in the breeze. The cows had gotten used to it by now. One of them even used the hay bale as shade. The whole scene looked peaceful, but I could feel the storm brewing. Karen thought she was dragging me into court to humiliate me. She didn't realize she'd just stepped into the spotlight and I had the script ready. That night, Mrs. Whitaker stopped by again. "I hear it's going to court," she said, smiling knowingly. "About time that woman learned she's not queen of the county. She thinks this is still her game," I told her. "But the moment she filed that suit, she made it mine." The widow nodded, eyes twinkling. "Good, because I already baked a batch of victory brownies." We laughed, and for the first time I felt calm, not the quiet before a storm, but the kind that comes when you know exactly what's coming next. Karen had ruled with fear. Now she was about to drown in facts. And when the gavel finally fell, I intended to be right there, front row, hat in hand, watching her learn what happens when you pave the wrong man's land. The courthouse smelled like dust, old coffee, and justice long overdue. When I walked through those glass doors that morning, hat in hand, every head turned. Maybe it was because of the story that had spread like wildfire, the farmer who stood up to the HOA. Or maybe it was because I tracked a little mud across their polished floor. Either way, I didn't mind. Tom met me by the benches outside courtroom 3. He looked sharp, black suit, silver tie, and the faint grin of a man who'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Been ready since the day they dropped that asphalt." He chuckled. "Then let's go teach Karen what the word annexation actually means." When the bailiff called the session to order, Karen was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table like she owned the building. Her lawyer, a tall man with slick hair and a smile that could melt ice, or maybe cause it, leaned over, whispering in her ear. She looked smug, confident, untouchable. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Honorable Lydia Reese, took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and scanned the paperwork. All right, she said. We're here for the case of Oakwood Meadows Homeowners Association versus Charles Turner. The HOA alleges that Mr. Turner obstructed a community access road. Mr. Lake Turner, represented by counsel, contests the claim and has filed a countersuit for illegal construction and trespassing. Counsel, you may proceed. Karen's lawyer stood up first, buttoning his jacket like this was a movie, and he was auditioning for smug attorney Hassone. Your Honor, he began smoothly. This case is not about ownership or boundaries. It's about community welfare. The HOA constructed a road that benefits every resident of Oakwood Meadows by improving accessibility and safety. Mr. Turner, unfortunately, has chosen to obstruct that road, endangering public order and defying multiple notices of compliance. He gestured toward me like I was the villain in a fairy tale. I wanted to laugh, but Tom beat me to it with words sharper than barbed wire. Your Honor, Tom said, rising slowly, the HOA didn't construct a road. They trespassed, vandalized, and illegally paved over private farmland owned by my client, land his family has held for 75 years. They didn't seek permission. They didn't obtain permits. They didn't even check property boundaries. What they did was arrogant, reckless, and completely outside their authority. He dropped a thick binder on the table with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the courtroom. This, Tom said, is the evidence. The judge raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Tom began with the basics, the land deeds. He showed the original county survey from 1948, then the updated zoning maps. Every single one proved the same thing: the south pasture was mine. No HOA jurisdiction. No shared easement. Just dirt and legacy. Karen shifted in her seat, lips tightening. Then Tom moved on to the paperwork. These, he said, holding up printed invoices, are the construction expenses signed by Mrs. Whitmore under the name of a contractor called M&J Infrastructure Solutions. He paused. We called the number listed. It goes to a disconnected line. The address belongs to an empty lot. The judge looked up sharply. You're saying the contractor doesn't exist? That's correct, Your Honor. The HOA created a shell company to funnel funds, community funds, into a private project built on someone else's property. Karen's lawyer tried to interject. Objection speculative, overruled Judge Reese said flatly. Continue. Tom smiled faintly, gladly. He went through the photos, next aerial shots of bulldozers tearing down my fence, time-stamped images of the road's construction, and a video from my trail camera showing HOA trucks crossing my property line at dawn. The judge leaned forward, squinting at the footage. And you have proof this was authorized by the HOA board. Tom clicked to the next slide, a scan of meeting minutes signed by Karen herself. The silence that followed was thick enough to shovel. Then came the witnesses. First, Mr. Patterson, who testified how the HOA fined him for planting tulips unapproved by the board. His voice shook with age, but not with fear. Next, Mr. Rodriguez, who explained how Karen's crew replaced his mailbox without consent and billed him for it. Each story painted a pattern, a board run like a dictatorship in pearls. Finally, the star witness, Mrs. Whitaker. She marched to the stand wearing her Sunday best and the calm confidence of someone who'd baked enough pies to feed an army. Mrs. Whitaker, Tom said, you've lived in Oakwood Meadows for how long? 22 years, give or take a few Karen meltdowns. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. Even the judge smiled. Tom nodded. Can you tell the court how Mrs. Whitmore treated residents? She treated us like children who couldn't be trusted with our own lawns. Mrs. Whitaker said firmly. She fined me once for putting up Christmas lights too early. Said it violated the neighborhood's aesthetic balance. I told her the only thing unbalanced was her sense of power. More laughter. Karen glared daggers. Mrs. Whitaker wasn't done. I saw the roadwork too. Her people were out there before dawn trucks and all. When I asked if they had permission, she told me, we make the rules here. Well, looks like she's about to learn what happens when the rules learn back. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel. Order, order in the court. But it was clear which way the wind was blowing. When it was Karen's turn to take the stand, her confidence cracked like cheap porcelain. Her lawyer asked rehearsed questions, and she answered with the charm of a malfunctioning robot. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, why did the HOA authorize construction? It was for community improvement, she said tightly. Did you confirm the property boundaries? I relied on internal maps. Did you obtain a county permit? Her pause lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. It was under review. Tom stood. May I cross-examine? The judge nodded. Tom approached slowly, voice calm, steady, lethal. Mrs. Whitmore, is it true? You received multiple complaints about the road before construction even began. Yes, but, and that you ignored them. And that you told at least one resident, and I quote, "We make the rules here." Her face reddened. I was misquoted. Tom pulled a printed email from the file. Then this is a remarkable coincidence since the quote appears in your own message dated June 14th. The courtroom gasped. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at her lawyer like she wanted to vanish. Tom delivered the final blow. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you know the term trespass?" She glared at him. "Of course." "Good," he said, "because that's what you did. To his land, to his rights. And to every person you claim to represent." Silence. The judge adjusted her glasses again, looked down at the evidence, then back up at Karen. "I've heard enough." When the gavel came down, it was like thunder. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, Charles Turner," Judge Reese said. "The HOA constructed an unauthorized structure on private property, falsified permit documentation, and misappropriated community funds. The road will be removed at the HOA's expense. Damages awarded to Mr. Turner, full restoration of property plus punitive compensation for trespass." She turned to Karen. "As for you, Mrs. Whitmore, I suggest you step down before the county investigates further." Karen's face went pale, then red, then a color I can only describe as defeat mixed with expensive lipstick. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. Tom shook my hand, smiling. "Told you we'd bury them." I just nodded, too stunned to speak. As Karen stormed out, the cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions she ignored. Mrs. Whitaker patted my shoulder and whispered, "Justice always tastes better with chocolate." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the courthouse steps. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. They'd paved over my pasture, but now the ground felt solid again. I tipped my hat to the crowd and said quietly to no one in particular, "Guess that's one road they won't be traveling again." The morning after the verdict, the air felt different. For weeks, the smell of hot asphalt and anger had hung over my land, but now there was only the soft scent of dew and grass. The kind that used to greet me every morning before the HOA decided to play God. I stood on the porch with my coffee staring at that cursed strip of road. It still ran through my pasture like an ugly scar, but at least now I knew it was living on borrowed time. The judge had given them 14 days to remove it and restore the land to its original agricultural condition. 14 days. That was fine. I'd waited longer for rain. The first truck arrived 3 days later, county contractors hired by the new reforming HOA board. They weren't the usual clipboard crowd. These were real workers. Men in mud-stained boots and orange vests, laughing, spitting sunflower seeds, and shaking their heads at what they called the dumbest road we've ever seen. One of them approached me as I leaned on the fence. "You the farmer who took on the HOA?" I nodded. "That'd be me." He grinned, holding out his hand. "Well, Mr. Turner, I gotta say, you've got fans at the county office. They've been waiting to see someone knock that woman off her pedestal for years." "Guess I was just the unlucky volunteer," I said, shaking his hand. "Nah," he said, smiling. "You were the right kind of stubborn." The crew got to work quickly. The sound of jackhammers and asphalt cutters filled the air, echoing across the hills, like justice being poured back into the soil. Every chunk of road they ripped up felt like a piece of my family's history being restored. And standing there watching, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The neighbors showed up one by one. Mrs. Whitaker brought folding chairs and a fresh batch of brownies. The Pattersons brought lemonade. The Rodriguez kids held homemade signs that said, "BYE, BYE, HOA Highway." It was ridiculous and perfect. By noon, half the community was there, sitting under umbrellas, cheering every time a slab of asphalt was hauled away. Someone even started a slow clap when the first stop sign came down. I laughed so hard my sides hurt. "Never thought I'd see the day people would celebrate road demolition like a football game." Mrs. Whitaker winked. "It's not the road we're celebrating, dear. It's the fall of the empire that built it." Around sunset, the last of the asphalt was gone. What remained was a long, rough scar of dirt and gravel stretching through the pasture. I walked out across it barefoot, feeling the soil beneath my feet again. It was uneven, raw, but real. That's the thing about land it remembers. You can cover it in concrete, but the earth never forgets what it was before. The next morning, I fired up the tractor. The cows followed like old friends, curious and calm. I plowed the first furrow over the empty road, the dark earth curling over the tracks like it was swallowing the past. It felt poetic, the same machine that once stood in defiance now bringing life back to what they'd tried to take. A week later, the pasture was green again. Grass sprouted where asphalt used to shimmer. The cows grazed lazily, reclaiming their old territory like nothing had ever happened. The new HOA board, made up mostly of humbled neighbors, sent a formal apology letter signed by every member. We acknowledge our past mistakes and vow to restore trust, transparency, and respect for property rights. It was neatly typed, polite, even heartfelt. I tacked it to the barn wall under a horseshoe for good luck. And Karen, she was gone. Word around town was that she'd resigned in disgrace after an internal audit found financial irregularities. Some said she sold her house and moved 2 counties over. Others claimed she was still fighting fines of her own. I didn't care. The only thing I knew for sure was that the next time someone tried to build a road without asking, they'd think twice. The local news did a follow-up segment. They called it The Road That Went Nowhere. They filmed me standing in the pasture, wind tugging at my hat. The reporter asked Mr. Turner, what message would you give to anyone dealing with an overreaching HOA? I thought about it for a second. Stand your ground, I said simply. They might have money rules and fine print, but you've got truth. And truth doesn't need permission to exist. The clip spread again, not as viral as the first time, but enough that people from all over the state started emailing me, strangers, thanking me for standing up for them, for proving that one person could still win against the clipboard. Brigade. Tom and I met for lunch a week later at the same diner where this whole mess started. He looked 10 years younger, which is saying something for a man who drinks coffee like it's oxygen. You made state news, he said, sliding a newspaper across the table. On the front page, a photo of me leaning on the tractor, smiling like a man who'd just reclaimed his sanity. The headline read, "Farmer Wins Legal Battle Against HOA Tyranny." I grinned. They're making it sound heroic. Well, you did fight a small dictatorship armed only with paperwork and sarcasm. We both laughed. Then Tom grew serious. You know you did more than win a case. You scared every crooked HOA in this county. Good, I said. Maybe they'll stop mistaking other people's land for blank canvas. He raised his coffee cup. To blank canvases reclaimed. We toasted. That evening after he left, I drove back to the pasture. The sun was setting, painting everything gold. The rebuilt fence gleamed. The cows wandered through tall grass tails, flicking lazily. I stood by the oak tree and looked out across the field where the road had once been. If you didn't know the story, you'd never guess anything had happened here. The earth had healed fast like it wanted to forget. But I didn't want to forget, because sometimes the land isn't just dirt, it's memory. It's proof that something or someone refused to be erased. I took off my hat, closed my eyes, and whispered, "We did it, Dad." A breeze passed through the trees, soft and low like an answer. Weeks later, a letter came in the mail, not from the HOA, not from the county, from Mrs. Whitaker. Inside was a handwritten note and a photo of the old road being torn apart. For the scrapbook she'd written, a reminder that even the biggest bullies eventually trip over their own rules. I smiled, framed the photo, and hung it by the door. Now every morning when I grab my hat and step outside, I see that picture, a reminder that no matter how loud the noise, truth always outlasts asphalt. The grass sways. The air smells like summer again. And for the first time, in a long time, I don't have to wonder what fresh hell the day will bring. Because this morning my land is mine. People like to say you can't fight City Hall. Maybe that's true. But you can sure as hell fight the HOA. This story wasn't really about a road. It was about respect, the kind you earn, not the kind you demand with fines and forms. What Karen and her board forgot is that community doesn't come from rules. It comes from decency. You can build all the fences and bylaws you want, but if you trample the people who live behind them, sooner or later, they'll stand up. If you're watching this and you've ever been bullied by an HOA, a boss, or anyone who thinks a title makes them untouchable, remember this: truth doesn't need permission, and fairness doesn't come with a membership fee. So stand your ground, speak up, fight back when you're right, and when you win, don't gloat. Smile, shake the dust off your boots, and enjoy the silence of a morning that finally belongs to you. Now tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what would you have done if they paved through your land?